You know what they say, all you need is love, but sometimes that can be easier said than done. Jeff Londraville, he's the author of The Filter, and he's joining us with ways to make the most out of our relationships and tell us how to bring love into our lives. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Good to see you, Seth.
So it's February, and that's why we're chatting about this, because people are in and out of love. It's a tumultuous month, but how can we keep love in our lives?
Well, first understand where love comes from. And where our thoughts about love come from. You know, where do we learn about it? What's going on with our thoughts of what do we deserve and what we think we don't deserve? That's very important.
Now, Jeff, you have a bunch of great tips today. The first one is to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. Learn from our mistakes is so important because that makes us either smarter, better, or weaker, depending on our next relationship. So if you can basically separate the emotion from what you've learned and take a look at it as, okay, what went well here and what didn't go well here. So instead of focusing or dwelling on the fact of what didn't go well, it's just going to strengthen what went right or what went wrong. And you have that control. Again, if you can separate the emotion to there's loss here, what's the problem here, and then hopefully give your attention to this is okay, it wasn't the right fit, there's emotional attachment that I miss here, but you know what? I can look at it in a way of what I've learned.
And I think even before we begin that process of learning about someone else and about what went right and wrong in our relationships, we need to examine our relationship with ourselves first, because ultimately that's, not selfishly, but that's the most important.
Exactly, exactly. Where does love come from? But it comes from yourself as well. What do you think you deserve? You know, what are you teaching people to treat you like? And that's very important. You know, insecurity is probably the biggest toxic for relationships. Low self-esteem is probably the worst thing for a relationship because ultimately then you don't know what you want and you think what you deserve is so low. And so what you have to understand is if you have that insecurity and that low self-esteem, it's not someone else that fixes that. You're looking for a prince or a princess to come into your life and fix that for you. Ultimately that will show signs, that will come out in some different ways, that will ultimately hurt your relationship. So you really want to focus on what can I do to be prepared when I meet the right person.
And the other thing too is once you figure yourself out and you know this is who I am, this is what I like, that certainly makes going out and trying to meet other people a heck of a lot easier.
Exactly. I mean, what are you sharing to the world when you walk into a room? What are you sharing to the world when you open your mouth? Are you showing that you have confidence, some self-esteem, and you look like people want to be around you? Or are you showing that you're damaged in low self-esteem and insecurities where people go, whoa, this person really has some issues that I don't know if I want to be around. So what are you telling the world is so important?
And speaking of those issues, you know, you learn from yourself, obviously, but you need to learn how you learned these things. You need to learn about how you learned love.
Right. In my book, The Filter, in chapter 8, we talk about where love comes from. So you thought of this somehow. You have these thoughts. Now, is there good thoughts or bad thoughts about love? Depending on how you grew up, depending on who told you this is what love is. Sometimes there's abuse in the situation, and that's, of course, not love. But sometimes people think that way. This is how I deserve to be treated because this is what I learned. That doesn't always make it right, okay? So we have to find out where do our thoughts of love come from, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and then ultimately, what do we deserve?
And when you find something that you deserve, you need to kind of run with it. And when you have all this negativity, and so it's what you talk about, when you have these external negativities that come in, you need to kind of dissuade yourself from them and not think about them at all.
Right. You got to filter out the negative stuff, whether it's love, whether it's choices, whether it's low self-esteem in any certain situation, because ultimately you're giving that off. You know, are you giving the right things off to people? So you want to understand, you know, this low self-esteem is bothering me, bothering your relationship. So how do I want to be treated in this situation towards anybody? And that goes for any relationship, Seth.
Yeah, it can be a familial or brother, sister, any of those.
Exactly. So how are you contributing to any relationship, whether it's work, whether it's brother, sister, mother, father, any relationship? How am I showing love? Do I know what love is? Where does love come from? You ask yourself these things and ultimately be honest with yourself. And again, try to separate the emotion of, I feel real bad, this is real sad, and that may be true. But ultimately, you need to separate that self so you can move on in a better, smarter way. For the next relationship, you can be better and have more of what you really deserve.
Because that's your last tip. It's you need to have more of what you deserve. You need to find out what you want in life after you figured yourself out and get it.
Right, absolutely. And so people always think, oh, how come, and they dwell on, how come this hasn't worked out for me? How come I haven't found love? How come I haven't found the right person? And ultimately, you try to separate yourself and say, listen, I know I can control what I think and what I do. I'm going to make myself right in every single way possible. Now, this is never easy, but the benefits are huge in any relationship. So you want to concentrate on what can I do? Never mind trying to have someone fix me. What can I do to fix myself? And then ultimately, I'm ready for that relationship. I'm ready for that Mr. Right or Mrs. Right.
Exactly. Well, if people out there are still looking, maybe your tips will help them. But either way, thank you so much for stopping by today. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you
to
so
have
much,
you
Seth.
here. Coming